You're listening to the We Are Libertarians podcast network. Find all of our shows at wearelibertarians.com.
Libertarian Country is one of the fastest growing and most popular liberty-themed apparel companies in the world. This American-based company was founded by two brothers out of Baltimore who had a vision to create an online store that offers fun, unique, and controversial political clothing and accessories. This five-star company offers the hottest shirts, hoodies, hats, and so much more. So check them out today. This is an independently owned, liberty-loving business that basically gives you the exact type of apparel and paraphernalia that you've wanted anyway. You just didn't know you wanted it now. Every purchase you make using the link in the show notes allows a small part of your purchase to come back and support the show. So go grab some awesome Libertarian Country swag using that link in the show notes. You'll thank me later. Real fast, let me go ahead and tell you about InboxDollars. Are you looking for a side hustle so easy you could do it while sitting on the toilet or in between commercials watching your favorite show? Unless you're like on demand and commercials are like an ancient thing to you, hear me out. InboxDollars has your back. For 20 years, InboxDollars has paid over $59 million in cash rewards to its members for doing everyday online activities such as reading emails, taking online surveys, playing games, and watching videos and TV. They also have ongoing promos and contests for members to win money online. And they share the top ways for people to get beauty samples, free printable coupons, and other free online stuff. With so many easy ways to earn extra cash online and having fun in the process, it's no wonder Forbes, Mashable, Bustle, and so many other trusted outlets name InboxDollars the easiest and fastest way to earn money online. If you're looking for a way to influence future products and services while getting paid at the same time, then InboxDollars is for you. Click the special link in the show notes of this episode today and get $5 just for signing up. Get this $5 signing bonus just for creating an account. That's InboxDollars. The link is in the show notes of today's episode. Get it, get your $5, and get started.
Prepare yourself. You're on the run with Remso W. Martinez.
All right, everyone, welcome back. It's great to be with you. Another episode. I want to go ahead and just thank everyone that's been leaving reviews on iTunes. I haven't really been pushing it lately because I don't want to be one of those people that's constantly asking and begging. But when I go on to iTunes or Stitcher or wherever and I see just unsolicited reviews from you, telling me that what you like about the show and that you're sharing it with friends and all that type of stuff, it really does let me know that the content that me and everyone else at the We Are Libertarians Network are putting out is actually resonating with you, and it's bringing you the conversations that you want to hear. And it's great to actually have this engagement, especially over on Instagram, where really your recommendations, your comments, your criticisms, they're actually influencing the way the show goes. And the one thing that I did promise at the beginning was that we were not going to go ahead and just discuss what's going on in the news. You can get that anywhere else. And honestly, I don't have the energy to talk about it. I know a lot of you don't have the willpower to want to listen to it. There are many different ways for you to get that information. I shouldn't be beating you over the head with it. Instead, we're going to go ahead and carry on the conversations that you want to have. And when it comes to actually this big question, do we understand the lives of other people? It's something that a lot of people like to say they do understand. We have empathy. We have sympathy as human beings. And the one thing that I've learned over the last couple of years is that you can never know enough about how other people see the world and how they experience it, especially now, not getting into the politics or the cultural issues of the world, but, the age of comfort, as somebody said recently, is over. And now's the time to actually ask questions and really try and dive into the parts of the world around us that are somewhat, they're in our blind spots sometimes. And whether it's big issues or small issues, we can never know enough. Constantly learning is what's going to help us get through these times and for life, because one day this whole thing is going to end and we only have the rest of our lives to deal with. But we've got a fun conversation coming to you now. Hannah Cox, Thank you for joining the program today. It's early in the morning, well, earlier for me because I'm a creature of the night. But thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
So I reached out recently because so here's kind of like the backstory behind this conversation. I went to Liberty University and I got a letter in the mail recently for homecoming, which is apparently in October, and I have not been back to campus in a while to actually visit. Going back to where I went to college, while I understand for a lot of people that's really fun, that's just not really something I wanted to do on a weekend, especially with everything going on. So I reached out to a few of my friends, and it just reminded me, like, it's really kind of like its own world, especially being a private Christian college. And there are just some things of the LU private Christian university culture that I just kind of forgot. And for a lot of my friends who I graduated with in 2017, I'm so glad that I went there because I wouldn't have had the chance to meet them. And the one factor that really stood out between the friends I made there and the friends I've met elsewhere are the facts that a lot of them, surprisingly, were actually preachers' kids. And I didn't know that about you until recently. And the one thing that I actually do want to thank you for is you were sharing videos of your father's sermons online. And this was around the time that my church actually shut down here in Fairfax. And they started doing online sermons, but it was sporadic and there were technical difficulties. So when you would share those videos of your father preaching, it really came in a time where I needed that and where I definitely know that his congregation needed that. So I just want to thank you for just doing that one simple act for people that might not ever say anything, but it was definitely something I noticed. Being a preacher's daughter, I've got to ask, when you tell that to people sometimes, especially growing up, what were some of the quick reactions people would give you? Because I definitely remember the ones that I gave when I was a little bit more ignorant in my younger years. Like, oh my gosh, did that? What was it? Annoying? Is it like frustrating having your father also be your preacher? Did you have to travel for missionary trips all the time? What was life growing up, and how did that factor being involved in your relationship with your father really make your relationship with him different than, let's say, other people who wouldn't have a situation like that?
Yeah. Well, first, I'm so glad to hear that the videos were helpful. I was thrilled that he was producing them and putting them online. His church really came together to start that production around the time of COVID. And the first 2 months of COVID, I was trapped in New York City. So they were hugely helpful to me. And I'm glad to hear they were helpful for other people. I'm just really, really proud of my father. I think he's the smartest person on the planet. I think he's full of wisdom. And so I'm always excited when people find his preaching because it's really in depth. And I think that for a lot of people, they grow up hearing maybe the same kind of sermons over and over and over, and they don't really get to go past that. So I love the depth that he goes to. But growing up as a pastor's kid is really unique. And my siblings and I often talk about how our experience is hard to vocalize, even in like dating relationships or friendships. It's hard to really explain what it was like growing up. I have 3 younger siblings, and there's a lot of stereotypes around preachers' families, and we definitely met a lot of them. We were homeschooled largely. We had a big family. We lived in, the Southeast. My dad is of the Southern Baptist denomination. But my life kind of took place as a pastor's kid in a few different phases, and I had very different experiences with it in each of the phases. When I was first born, my dad had taken his first church. He and my mom married young and went to the seminary in Louisville, which is the largest Southern Baptist seminary. He had gotten hhis master's. He was the first person in his family to go to college, and they graduated from there. I think when he was in his early 20s, 24, 25 years old, he was graduating with his master's, and he took his first church in a tiny town in Alabama called Athens. And that's where I and 2 of my siblings were born. And so during that phase of my life, I was really little, and the church was sort of all I knew. And it was a smaller church. It was an older church. And that was just a magical experience, honestly. Like, the people in that church were like my family. It was like having a dozen grandparents. And there's this interesting thing that happens when you're the pastor's family or a pastor's kid that I don't think I'll ever totally understand because I'm not outside of it. But people really love their pastor. on a level that I just can't totally vocalize. And that extends to their families. And so we were just loved so well, treated so well. It was just perfect, happy, cozy environment. And I really loved that church. We still go back and see a lot of the people that were members there. A lot of them have unfortunately passed at this point because they were older even when we were there. But it was just a very special place and time. And I didn't know any different than being a pastor's kid. I had the run of the church. My best friend was the music minister's son. And that was sort of all I knew. When I was 6, we moved back to Louisville, Kentucky for my dad to get his PhD at the seminary this time. And so it was a new phase where he was getting that degree. He had 4 kids at that point, and he was pastoring a small country church. So it was a lot. I didn't get to see my dad very often when I was really little. It was very, very busy. Many people don't realize just how 24/7 a pastor's role is. You know, what they do on Sunday mornings, Sunday evenings, Wednesday nights, that's just a tiny percentage of it. There's all the time they prepare the sermons and get ready to speak. But on top of that, you know, they're going and visiting people in hospitals. They're often going out and making visitations to people's homes to try to witness to them. They're hosting events at the church. They're planning events for children in all different ages. And so it's a full-time job. When we were at that point, we lived on the church's property. So this is something that's sort of fallen out of fashion, but in the old times, a lot of churches would have what you call a pastorium, which is a house on the property where the pastor and his family live. And that's because traditionally pastors have been paid very little money. And so that's how they really survived. And that was certainly true for us at that time period. We made very little money. It was, I don't think we could have afforded to pay our bills had it not been for that pastorium at that point. And that was also a really great experience. The church was like our family. We lived on the church's property. And so I had the run of this huge country property that had like a baseball field and a huge playground. And like, I remember we would go like skateboard and roller skate in the church because the linoleum floors were so great for that kind of activity. It was just a very charmed kind of life. We were homeschooled. So, that was all I knew. And most of the other kids I knew were in our homeschool group. And so there's this notion that when you're homeschooled, you don't have a social life. That's not true at all. We played sports. We had a huge social life, but everybody else was sort of from that background. I didn't get any weird reactions to being a pastor's kid. It was all just very normal. If anything, there was just a little bit higher expectation for your behavior that was placed on you, right? Like you don't get to mess up. You don't get to be a brat. You don't get to sleep in when you're tired. Like you're at church all the time and you're representing the family and you're representing the church. And so there is a lot of expectations put on you and responsibility. You know, if a new kid were to come into the class, you were expected to befriend them and help show them around and really kind of play host in that way. So all that to say, then my dad took a break from preaching after he graduated with his PhD. He was hired on to teach at the seminary. And so my life just radically changed at that point. And we started going to private schools in the city. We were going to a really big church that my dad wasn't the pastor of for the first time in my life. But he was still very plugged in since he was teaching at the seminary. Most of the pastors there were his colleagues or his students.
But to go from leading it to just being a part of it, I mean, that alone must have been like a big culture shock.
Yeah, it was weird. Like you don't realize how much you're sort of catered to in that environment when you're the pastor's family. Like everybody knows who you are. Everyone is welcoming to you and nice to you. And you kind of just have this place of prominence in the church. And when we started going to the larger church, I was just one of hundreds of students that were going there. It was a really big church. We'd always been in smaller churches. And I found that very freeing. I was in 6th grade. I remember I lied about my name when I first started. I was like, I can be whoever I want to be right now. And so I told everybody my name was Selena for like the first 6 months I was there. I was obsessed with Selena, the movie at the time. And I got busted big time, like 6 months in. My youth pastor was like, "You love your daughter, Selena." And my dad was like, "Oh my gosh." But yeah, I found it like really freeing to not be the pastor's kid for a number of years. It was sort of like, I just got to be a kid and just be participatory. But, we were still way more involved than your normal family would be. We definitely were going on mission trips a good bit of the time. Like all of my spring breaks, I would be in a city helping to plant a church. So I would go door knocking and try to talk to people about a new church that was starting in Chicago or in Philadelphia, wherever we were. So a lot of times there's no division between your church life and the rest of your life. Like it's all very fluid. And that's how it is for a pastor's family as well, where, they're never not working. They're always on call. I know many times we've had to leave vacations early because someone in the church died or someone in the church was sick. So you're kind of on call, and you have a deep responsibility to the community that you're in to really play a lot of different roles in people's lives. When I was 16, my dad decided to go back into pastoring. And at that point we moved to South Carolina. And that was kind of the last phase. And when we moved to South Carolina, it was a much bigger church than his previous two churches. And I was also at an age where I just was under a lot more scrutiny. I think I was 16. And I had a hard time with that transition. I felt, in hindsight, I think it had a lot more to do with moving from a pretty Midwestern, good-sized city to a deep rural small town. And so there was a bit of a culture shock for me that came alongside that. And I really didn't fit in super well to the town. But I had a little bit harder time with that phase because I just did feel like my every move was watched. And it's difficult when you are a pastor's kid, having to feel like you can't make mistakes, or feeling like you're expected to not act like a normal kid. And there is a kind of huge downside where I think some church members are really judgmental of pastors' kids and maybe even use them to feel better about their own kids. Like if they see the pastor's kid messing up, it makes them feel better about whatever their own kid is doing or whatever struggles they're having internally. And so there's a lot of scrutiny on you. And I hadn't really felt that in the previous two churches, whether that be due to their size or because of the age I was at. That just wasn't a negative experience I had. I did feel that more in high school and really resented that in many ways. And really felt like for a long time that pastors shouldn't have kids, because I think that that's a huge commitment and lifestyle choice that a pastor and his wife make. But to ask a child to make that choice is a bit much. I don't think that's fair. And I don't think it's right that a child should not have that autonomy and not be able to make the simple mistakes and experiences that other people make as they grow up. So I've kind of softened on that over the years, but I really didn't enjoy the end of high school for those reasons. And I think for a long time when I was in college, like I wasn't super active in church. I went to a Southern Baptist school in Nashville, Belmont University.
Okay.
Christian elements, but it was more for a music career, which is their big major and scene that they're involved in. So I wasn't really there for that reason. It just happened to be a Southern Baptist school. But I really continued to be a Christian and have my faith, but I just didn't really want to be involved in church or an organized kind of space for many years due to some of that. And then I think over the years, like you sort of get over your rebellious phase and you kind of soften, and it's very different now. And, now I look at it in a way where I think the role that my parents, and I want to include my mom in that too, because even though she's not the pastor, a pastor's wife plays a tremendous role in the church and the community and the lives of people who are active. Oftentimes, my mom runs the women's program at the church, so she's really a women's minister in many ways herself. But it's a huge gift to give people. And I know like I have inherited so much from my parents' work, from their vision, from their heart for people. They've really taught me to give to others and to be sacrificial. And I think that led into my current work, which is, criminal justice reform. Is policy focused, but it is a form of me living out my faith and really trying to work for those who I feel like have not had the same advantages as myself. And so I, at this point, feel very proud of the work that we've done. I'm proud to be a part of the family. As far as reactions go over the years, it's usually something where people are, like, I don't want to say jealous, but like, that's sort of the right word. Like, I really wish my dad was faster. That always seemed like so much fun. What? Or I get more of the condescension, like, I guess you guys are really weird. Like, you guys must be the stereotypical odd family that.
Yeah. Like, I mean, for me, I definitely, my only view of what a pastor's kid was really the stereotypes. And I mean, for me, it was what I see a lot of in pop culture. You usually have two paths. You have the pastor's son or daughter who grows up and they become incredibly rebellious because they want to be everything that's the opposite of what they feel that they were somewhat pushed into being. And that's usually very negative. And then you have the other one, which is kind of like what you mentioned, where they're just incredibly sheltered and everything is great because they haven't seen really the the bad side of the world and everything. So in meeting other, other children of pastors and ministers, like I definitely did see some of those people. You could see living stereotypes, but the one thing I had to understand is, like that might be some odd case here and there, but that's not going to be the same story for 99% of the people who grew up that way. And it was just somewhat odd because like I definitely understand what it was like when you were explaining kind of like your earlier years as a kid. My father was active duty Army, still is, and I remember my earliest memories of him were being a company commander as a captain. And we like my mom was with the Officers' Wives Club, and it was one of those situations where everyone knew me as Captain Martinez's kid. And I loved it. It was awesome. You want to, sit on a bench somewhere and see tanks go by and have them come out of the hatch and wave to you and stuff. Like it was cool. And then definitely when I was a teenager, it became a lot more difficult because now he's higher up in rank. He has way more eyes on him. My mom is still involved, but as a teenager, you kind of want your own identity. And the question comes, it's like, do I want this obligation or do I want to do something outside of it? Because it really became a situation where with all the moves, with all the deployments, especially, I began to see it's like, why do I keep having to change schools? Why do I keep having to say goodbye to my friends and go make new ones? Why do I constantly have to go to these ceremonies for things that I don't want to be at? It's like I felt like I definitely was not given a choice. And definitely going into adulthood, obviously I look back at those years and it's like, well, I was a kid or I was a teenager, and teenagers do that. But it's one of the situations where it's like, what did people think of me as the officer's son? If, like I went to a school with a majority of the students being the children of enlisted soldiers and their kids don't really think very much of officers, especially their children, because if the enlisted soldier's son does something in town and gets the cops called, they're going to the clink overnight. If the officer's son does that, not saying that this happened to me, but if the officer's son does that, well, he'll get a pass because he's a good kid and we don't want to do anything to embarrass his father or his mother. So it's definitely those situations where, the big question I always remembered was, is this really my life or is this something that is just, the circumstance of where I happen to be, who I happen to be related to? And for me, the one question I had a lot of, especially when you go to officer or company support functions, was, do people like me because they like me or do they like me because of who my father is? Mm-hmm. And that messed with me a lot.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing to point out here where like you just don't feel like you get to be an autonomous person a lot of the time. Like even if you are radically different from your parents, like you're so attached to them, their reputation is so tied into you. That I remember like, especially when I was, in my high school years and struggling a bit more with the role, like my parents would say, these people came to us because they're concerned about you or they care about you. And I would say, they don't know me. Like these people don't know me at all. They know me as your daughter. And like, maybe they do care about me because of that role, but they don't actually know me as a person. And I think that's a hard thing to put on somebody, especially in your teenage years when you're trying to figure out who you are and you're so drawn to, your individualism and trying to express yourself and trying to forge your own path. It can be very difficult to not get the leeway to do that, and to have to worry about your parents' career as you're doing that. It's an extra burden for people for sure. And I think that's an important thing to point out.
When you would meet people, let's say when you went to college, was this one of those things that, as people would get to know you, would usually come up, or was it something that you kind of pushed towards, later into the conversation where you felt like you could trust them a little bit more, so that way that judgment factor wouldn't be something that would be initially there?
I think when I first got to college, it was something that I didn't bring up as often, not because I was like trying to hide it. It just was not a prominent part of my life at that point. It really wasn't something that I was focusing on. My faith wasn't really something I was super focused on, and it just really wasn't as big of a part of my life at that time. So I think it would come up, maybe a natural conversation, like, I start dating somebody and mention it or something like that. But typically it was something that like I just kind of left in the backdrop. I also, like, even through college, my parents were really, really strict, and I was the oldest. So I think this is something that, like, to varying degrees, my siblings didn't have as much of an issue with, but they were still very, very strict when I was in college, even though I was 5 hours away. And so I think my closer friends knew, like, I couldn't post pictures with a drink in my hand or things like that. Like, that would be a huge deal. So it just probably depended on how close you were with me. And then over the years, I think it's become something that I probably bring up more often, or maybe just, by virtue of being on social media more, it's something I share. I share things that my dad's doing or saying because I am proud of him and I want to help expand his reach, because I think his work is important. But it's definitely something that I think has entered the foreground a bit more in recent years. And I don't think I was ever scared of the stereotype. Like, I'm not someone who really cares what people think about me. And like, I know I don't fit the stereotype. So I wasn't concerned with that as much as I was just kind of wanting to live my own life and be an individual and like focus on other things for a time period.
I get that. And I mean, for me, I think I'll take a little bit of the opposite stance on just how I dealt with it. I'm not going to say I was remarkably insecure about certain things, but one of the biggest changes in my life was graduating from high school and then going on the military route. Because I remember 3 days after graduation, I went to basic, and then as soon as that's over, I get like 5 days to catch my breath, and I'm going to a military school in a state that I've never been to. And I have to go through the process all over again. And for me, it was really cool seeing my dad show up to my graduation in uniform as I was getting ready to start this next phase of my life, and then seeing the faces of the people that saw him. It's like, oh my gosh, like, I think my father was he was a lieutenant colonel at the time. Like, oh my God, his dad's a lieutenant colonel. Shit. Maybe we should have been nicer to him in some cases, but it was definitely one of those things where, yeah, he does that at my basic graduation. And then, people remember that because some of the people I went through that with also went to the same school as me. And the big obstacle I had was, has he earned this because of his actual merit, or is his dad pulling strings? People who are envious will do and say anything to justify what they want to think a situation is. And it was one of those moments where, the big challenge for me is what makes me different. Because of course, none of these people know my father. They may have seen him. They may have spoken like 3 or 4 words to him, but they don't know him. What do they think of? They just think of, a hardcore military vet, high-ranking officer, served with the baddest cavalry units in the Army. Let's look at his son. And to that degree, they looked at, well, where do we think he's getting the advantage? Well, what are his inadequacies compared to that? And I think that made me want to somewhat, I'm not going to say rebel, because here I am, I'm becoming my own person. I'm seeing more of the world. But definitely when it comes to, some of my own personal beliefs, some of my politics, I think maybe to some situations, I took some things to certain extremes just because I wanted to be different from my father. Now, this is just an assumption, so please correct me if I'm wrong, but, going through those growing phases from, your teenage years into adulthood, because, your father and your faith are somewhat tied, did you ever have a period where maybe your faith, wavered or took the backseat to some other priorities because of that relationship? Because for the lack of better terms, there is that stereotype amongst some, preachers' kids where it's like they want to go the exact opposite of their parents because they need to be seen. They feel this need to be seen as their own person. So in order to do that, they just become the opposite of the person that their parents raised.
Yeah, I actually had that conversation with one of my dad's colleagues a number of years ago where he said, we don't know exactly what causes this, but you see these extremes in pastors' kids where one's following in their pastor's father's footsteps and they're trying to, do the same route and they're in ministry and they are always just all bought in on it and they stay along that course their whole life. And then you've got the other extreme where they're like drinking a fifth of Jack every day in the freezer and like what causes this? And it's really difficult to say because even within my own family, and within my siblings, I think you can see very different reactions to it amongst us. I don't think I want to preface this with saying that I don't always agree with my dad on theology. Like we don't actually agree entirely. We have some similarities. He would, this is getting very wonky, but he would define himself as like a 3.5 Calvinist.
Gotcha.
I can't stand Calvinism. I would be, I can't stand it at all. I am much more in the Arminian school of theology. And I still grapple with my faith. And in my opinion, that's normal, right? I was given logic. I was given common sense. I was given reason by God. I don't think I'm not supposed to use it. And I think it's fine to question your faith. I think it's fine to question God. I think it's fine to search and to not always have the answers. And so I definitely go through periods, even nowadays, where I experience times where I don't feel strong in my faith. I know, a couple of years ago, I was really struggling. And I came to my dad about it because I was just so turned off by what's happening in white evangelical Christian America, where I think a lot of people really don't know their theology. And I see them applying it in ways that I find to be wholly unchristlike. And it was really discouraging to me and making me question, is this what I want to be associated with? Is this my faith? Do I need to look at other denominations or variations that maybe would be a better fit? I at one point was sort of considering converting to Judaism. Like I really was very much struggling with it. And it's my dad is, again, he's so smart. He's read everything. I've never come to my dad with a subject that he wasn't well-versed in. It amazes me. His mind is just truly incredible, but he was really patient with me and kind of let me question some of these things and work through it. And I feel like I've come out on the other side of that stronger and better off, but I don't think I've ever hit a point where I abandoned my faith because of, the role of being a pastor's kid. But I certainly think that it has the pressure from that role has made me want to be less engaged with my faith at certain times in my life where I just didn't want to be very active, or where it really was something where like, yeah, I believe in God, but I'm just not really interested in this right now. Like I'm not interested in being involved. I'm not interested in being active. And I really wasn't very active for a number of years. I think from the time I went to college in Nashville through the time I'd graduated, probably about a year or two after I graduated, I would go to church kind of sporadically, but I wasn't involved. And it was when I was about 23, 24, shortly after I'd graduated college, I happened to go to this charismatic church in Nashville. I was dating someone and his niece was like getting baptized.
That's not with like snakes and stuff, right?
It wasn't that far into it. But I also don't want to undersell it. Like this church was wild and I loved it. It was so different than how I was brought up. And I remember the first time I went with him to see his niece baptized, like people were like dancing in the aisles and I was like, where am I?
So it's kind of Pentecostal, like.
Yes.
There's definitely no volume control.
It's its own denomination. It's called Every Nation, and it's all over the country. Actually, it's a very big denomination now. But it was started in Nashville by Rice Brooks, who is the author of God's Not Dead. He's now over.
Okay, that explains a lot.
Yeah, he's now the bishop of the denomination. So he wasn't my senior pastor. My senior pastor was a man named James Lowe, who was actually married to one of the Winans sisters. So the music was like incredible. And I love this church. Not just for its style of worship, but it was the most diverse church I'd ever been into. Like I was the minority there. And it was very focused on missions and it was very focused on racial unity. And it was very focused on the church being the hands and feet. Like, and I loved that because I think that's something that's been preached a lot, but and my dad, this is not my dad's church. Like he absolutely believes in that. And they have amazing programs in their community. But for me in Nashville, that was not something I had really experienced with a church that meant it. And that, they were serious. If you joined, like you had to go through an interview, you had to go through a class. And then they were like, okay, where are you volunteering? Like, let's get you plugged in. What are you doing? And I just gravitated towards that so much. And I really loved the racial unity in that church. It was incredible to come together with people of various ethnic backgrounds from all over the world. It was a very immigrant heavy church. And I just loved getting to know Christians from so many different backgrounds. And I want to say, like, it was something that fundamentally changed me as a person, because I don't think you can really, truly, empathetically love people you don't know. And I think one of the biggest problems we have in America is that we're so divided. Even if you go to school with people who look differently than you, like, the likelihood that you have close friends who are of different backgrounds, different socioeconomic statuses, different, neighborhoods, it's so unlikely. We tend to gravitate to bubbles that look like us, and with people who have similar backgrounds to us. And so you don't really get to know other people and the struggles that they faced, or the things that concern them. And it was through going to that church that I really became far more concerned with criminal justice reform, and some of these things that had just not impacted me personally in my life. But because I became intimate, close friends with people I was going to church with, it really opened my eyes and made me far more empathetic to the issues they were facing in society, and made me want to get more involved. So that really sort of revitalized my faith, going to that church.
It really became your own at that point.
Yeah, that's right. And their theology was a bit closer to mine. And I loved the spiritual aspect of it. I think so often in evangelical churches, like, the spiritual aspect's really missing. It kind of feels dead. Like, this was a place when you walked in, like, there was a spirit there. You felt it. It was alive. It was powerful. We talked a lot more about the Holy Spirit there. We really leaned into that. And that was just a new side of Christianity that I had not seen before. So I think that was when I really kind of pivoted back to this being an important part of my life. I was involved with launching a special needs program there for children,
Oh, wow.
which was really rewarding and incredible. And I got to work with families that had children with varying needs in that. And so it was just awesome. And I think that was what made me recommit to my faith. And it really did become my own at that point.
Yeah, just two things off the top of my head. One, your experience in Nashville is so different than mine. I think I was blacked out most of the time. Those, what were they? The trolleys where you're drinking at the same time?
Taverns?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I fell off one of those.
Yeah, I've never tried it. They look difficult.
They're fun. Like, they're not meant to be difficult, but when you've been pre-gaming before that because you want to, quote, train, I don't know what I was thinking. Things get different. But I mean, secondly, I definitely think this is something that people only really understand when they start to grow older. I mean, I have a lot of people that listen to this show specifically who have graduated from high school or graduated from college. So there are a lot of listeners that are having this big transition moment in their life. And, they're going to have a really unique one because they did this when they had to, go attend their graduation via Zoom. So, I mean, I can only imagine the stories they're going to have. But I definitely have more of an appreciation for my parents now than even I did a couple years ago. I mean, with me and my father, we definitely went through a period where we did not talk to each other as much because we thought a fight was going to break out. And I look back and I really see those moments, and I feel guilty because I definitely see the parts where I may have agitated something, but I also give myself some credit because that's how sons and fathers are. We just go through that sometimes. And the one thing that I really do appreciate is that, for a while I saw my father, not because of him directly, but because of what he did and what he's going through professionally and personally. I mean, one, you definitely don't see your father as a human being who has his own challenges and stuff like that. You don't understand that till you really begin to see it. But like for me, I definitely now appreciate more the leniency my father gave me, because one thing that I'm actually happy was never a problem with my family was religion necessarily, because my father grew up, going to Catholic school, hardcore Roman Catholic, met my mother, could not marry my mother in a Catholic church because she wasn't Catholic and was not going to become Catholic. So what do? They join a Lutheran church in my hometown and they get married that way. And that was a bit of a problem for my parents because of his family. love them to death, but that was a problem that they put on them. So for my parents, they definitely wanted to raise me Christian, but how it was done was really kind of up to me. And sometimes I wish they were more strict about it in terms of that. I wish they were, but at the same time, I'm kind of glad they weren't. I definitely know that one of the things that I did during my more rebellious phase was I did not want to be Catholic. I hated being Catholic. Like, being Catholic was just the most doctrinally confined thing that I remember doing. And I hated going to mass growing up. So when I was like towards my last couple of years of high school, I'm not going to say I was an atheist necessarily, but I was definitely anti-Catholic. So when I got older, they definitely let me evolve on certain things. I'll never forget, like, my first communion was actually like my first year in the Army. I told my dad, it's like, hey Dad, I just had like my first communion. And he's like, well, how'd you do that? You didn't go through catechism. And I'm like, well, I went through a Protestant service. And he got kind of quiet for a second. And he's like, did you enjoy it? I'm like, yeah. And he's like, did you benefit from it? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, well, that's good. And it was one of those things where any other person could have said, well, that's not right. You shouldn't do that. What's wrong with you? It's just a phase. But he definitely let me test myself in that. And ultimately, that's why I ended up going to Liberty, the largest online residential Christian school in the world. And he was proud of me for that. And it was definitely one of those things where it was one of those moments when I graduated and I came home where I definitely saw, it's like, I didn't go there because my dad told me to. I didn't go there because he necessarily wanted me to. I went there because he let me. And he let me make my own choices. And that's definitely something that, sons and daughters growing up, and I see this with my own mother, her father passed away when she was 16. And I know she doesn't talk about him all the time, but I definitely see that part of her is missing. And she got robbed of many opportunities and many memories and many moments. So while, growing up, I'm still in my mid-20s, I definitely do see that stuff as being fresh. I definitely see it as, okay, that was a phase in my life that needed to happen.
Yeah. Well, and I think, you make so many great points that brings up so many things for me hearing you say that, because I think first and foremost, like, it sounds like your dad, similar to mine, like, is a giant, right? And it's kind of hard being the kid of a giant to measure up to that, to live in that shadow at times. And I think if you're a kid who's got natural leadership instincts, like, you really want to, like, that individualism and autonomy to make your own decisions. And I'm certainly that way. My brother, that's 2 years younger than me, is that way. We're the same Myers-Briggs. We're ENTJs. So, like, we are a tough bit to handle. And we were talking about just how hard we were to raise over Christmas. And my dad was just shaking his head, and he said, I can't tell you how hard it was to raise you all. And he said, I remember reading James Dobson and his advice for raising strong-willed children. And it said, like, just hang on, like, just try your best not to break them, to let them make their decisions, like, keep them in line, but, like, try not to break their spirit, because if you can raise these kids without doing that, like, they can go on and be world changers and do really big things. And so hearing my dad open up about his thought process, even on raising us, and how he was trying to balance that with letting us make our own decisions while also trying to keep us in line, made me just appreciate him even more. And I think that, in hindsight now, I can just recognize how truly great my dad was. When you're a kid, you don't know how, different your dad is from others or what you're experiencing.
Your parents are not allowed to have feelings.
Right. You don't as people, to be quite frank. And I remember one of my mentors at one point in my life said, one of the big things you have to learn as an adult is how to forgive your parents. They're humans. They make mistakes. And I think about that a lot. My parents didn't have the same tools that we even have now with the internet and all we know about psychology and, like, all these things that are at our fingertips. Like, they didn't.
God bless internet counseling.
Right. Seriously. Parents are trying to heal their own generational wounds and trying to, do the best they can. And in hindsight, I think my parents were absolutely incredible, amazing. They were patient. They were so forgiving. They, continued to just love me unconditionally, no matter what. And so I I'm so much more appreciative now as an adult, looking back on how they did with me, even though as a kid, like I was, hot to handle. It was a lot. But I think that now, having my dad to look at in his example, I'm so appreciative of that huge shadow he's cast for me to try to step in the footsteps of as I progress throughout my life, because I have an amazing example to look at. I have an incredible example of God's love because of how my father has loved me. And I know for so many people in our society, they've not gotten that from their fathers or haven't had the chance to grow up with their fathers. And I'm going to tear up talking about it. It's just, I'm so incredibly grateful for them and for how they raised me now and for everything that they were juggling to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I had a moment recently. By recently, I'm probably saying like, pre-plague, before the pandemic. And it was when my second book came out, How to Succeed in Politics and Other Forms of Devil Worship. Now, writing, media, journalism, politics, that was definitely one of those things where my dad and I had plenty of long talks about what am I actually doing with my life. And to say that he was not happy about certain things is, that it's just the way it was. But he still let me do it. He let me make mistakes and things. But when that book came out, my parents didn't read my first book because I didn't really want them to. I just didn't want that. I could receive criticism from anybody, but if I received any like an ounce of negative criticism about that from my parents, it would have crushed me. But like with my second book, they wanted to read it. Both of them did. Now I'll remember that my dad did not talk to me about it until after he had actually finished it. And all he said was it was really good. And we had to talk about it. Like he actually took a lot from it and was asking me questions about certain things. And I'll remember like I went on Facebook, and my dad never posts things. My dad is one of those dads who shares his own posts because he's afraid people won't see it on his Facebook wall. He actually wrote something out, and he was basically talking about how much he liked it and what he liked about it. And then at the end of it, he said, I'm just so proud that my son was able to do this all on his own and really take ownership of something that is just about him.
Nice.
And it was like, I was driving, I shouldn't have been doing this. I was reading the post at a red light, and then the light turned green. I pulled over at a park and I read it. And I cried like a bitch. It was bad. It was, for a good 20 minutes, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to let myself just take this in for like 20 minutes, and then I'm going to drive away. It was like I had not cried in years before that. But that was one of those moments where it's like my dad doesn't just respect me as his son, like he respects me as my own man in a way. And even though there had been many moments where he was definitely proud of me, that was one of those moments where it's like for a second, I was proud of myself because he was proud of me. Yeah. And, I'm thankful that despite all the challenges, all the hard moments, all the obstacles of growing up, the biggest privilege was having those moments and ultimately being allowed to be his son. And that's something only that God could have provided me. And I know that I'm blessed because of that. And I know plenty of people who don't have those relationships with their parents, who may not have had a parent growing up. Like both my parents are unique in the fact that my grandfather on my mother's side died when she was 16. My dad's mother died when he was 11. So it's like they both had these, somewhat fractured families because fate took them in a different direction. But both of them were able to have a very close nuclear family, despite all that, with the added hardships of the military. And we still tolerate each other.
Yeah, it's incredible how close I think families come out when they are raised in the way you and I were. Like I have an incredible bond with my family, and especially with my siblings. Like we are exceptionally close, and people always ask me like, why are you so close? How are you so close? And
it amazes me how many people don't like their siblings.
Yeah, right.
Like I get into fights with my brother and shit, but like we do a lot of stuff together that we don't have to do. Like we do a TV show together. We don't have to do that. We'll go to movies together just because we want to. Like, back when you could go see a movie. Right. But like, it still surprised me because I think we fight a lot. I think we do. But like compared to other people, like we're we're obnoxiously close.
Right. Yeah. Like there is nobody I'd rather hang out with than my siblings. I have 2 younger brothers, 1 younger sister, and we live.
And you were the oldest of them?
I'm the oldest.
Man, that must have been a pain.
Yeah, I think I was probably the worst. Like they probably have the biggest battle scars. But I don't really have memories of even fighting with them that much, especially in childhood. Like I think more so when we got older, maybe we fought a little bit more. But like we're so close, and like there's no one I'd rather be with, and like I would take a bullet for any of them, no question, in a second. Like they are everything to me, and so I'm always like kind of taken aback when people aren't close with their siblings. I'm like, what do you mean they're not your best friends? Like my first tattoo is each of the first letter in each of their names linked together. Like I'm just obsessed with my siblings, and
yeah, I don't love my brother that much. That's a bridge too far for me.
Yeah, but no, like we're really close, and I think that's because when you grow up in a really unique kind of setting, I guess when you move around a lot too, like your siblings are your best friends, and especially when you're homeschooled, like they're your classmates, like you're with them all the time. So it makes you really very tight. And even with the pandemic, like one thing that I've been really grateful for is when I got out of New York, I came back home. So I've been here since May, and I'm just getting this extra time with my parents, which you just appreciate in a whole other way when you get to be, late 20s, early 30s. And you're not going to have your parents forever, right? Like you're starting to see them getting older and like noticing like, oh, wow, they're actually aging, which when you live away from home, you just don't see happening as much, I guess. So I'm so grateful for this time I'm getting to spend with them, because I feel like even now as an adult, I learned so much and just really enjoy watching everything they do. And the cool thing now is, when I'm going around town, like I had a doctor's appointment this week, and one of the nurses rushed over to me and she was like, I just have to tell you how much your parents have meant to me. Here's the things they've done for me. Like, thank you so much for your parents. And it's really incredible to realize full scale the impact that they're making.
Definitely. So Hannah, I mean, we've covered a lot of ground in this episode. It's been a wonderful conversation. As we wrap up, for those kids that are growing up in a situation similar to yours, whether it's through career or it's through something even more so by having your faith connected to your job, I mean, what's your advice for those young people that are, going to encounter those challenges and are going to be given opportunities to look back at those moments and definitely grow as people?
I think one of the most important things in faith is just to know it's okay to, again, like I said earlier, it's okay to question it. It's okay to have ups and downs in your faith. It's okay to take your time and figure out what you actually believe. I think that's one of the most fundamental things you can ultimately do, especially if you are struggling in that kind of role or with your faith, is to really take the time and read and figure out, what do you believe independently? That was something I did with my politics early on. It's something I didn't do with my faith as early on. And so I knew like I didn't agree with my parents totally in some ways, but I didn't really know how to articulate that. And sitting down and actually doing my due diligence to figure out what it was I believed and how I wanted to live that out, and how I wanted to be consistent in a way that felt honest and true to who I am, was essential for me, and making sure, like, my parents and I have a really great respectful relationship, but we don't agree on a lot of things, and we recognize that, and we're able to respect each other's views, and that's really helped our relationship over the years, because there's been times it's been rocky, for sure, and that's something that I think has really helped us get on great footing now that I'm an adult and I have a whole new relationship with them.
Awesome. So Hannah, if people want to connect with you and see all the awesome things that you're doing, how can they do so?
I am at Hannah Cox 7 on Twitter. I'm at Hannah Cox 7 on Facebook. I have a public profile on Facebook they can connect with. My Instagram is connected through there. If they're interested in seeing my dad's sermons, I frequently post them on my private Facebook page, but they can also go to Concord Baptist Church in Anderson, South Carolina, and watch a ton of different sermons and different materials that they have up as a church as well.
Awesome. Well, Hannah, thank you so much for joining the program. I know I definitely appreciate this talk. I know a lot of our listeners will have as well. I mean, this is one of those topics that I'm really happy I got to talk about, because in the world where so many other things are distracting us from the things that are going on in our own lives, I really think conversations like this really teach something to people about themselves. So just thank you for taking the time to talk to me about this.
Yeah, thanks for making the space. It's a great discussion I haven't gotten to have before, so I really love the talk.
Awesome. Well, folks, if you love this, I mean, do me a simple favor. Send the show to somebody. I mean, come on, you must have gotten through all of Netflix and YouTube by now when you're watching Extraction on Netflix for 5 times like I have, because there's nothing else coming out. I mean, the least you could do is send this around. Leave us a good, honest rating and review on iTunes. And as always, I'm here every Tuesday and Thursday. Subscribe, share, and enjoy. As always, I'm Remso W. Martinez. You're listening to On the Run. Have a great night. Bye.
Check out our other shows and more from the We Are Libertarians network at wearelibertarians.com.